On today's show, we break down the biggest risers and fallers in the 2025 NHL draft class, including the likes of Michael Misa, Anton Frondell, and Ivan Ryabkin.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospect related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. My name is Sebastian High. I'm your host and the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And today we have an exciting show for you where we're going to be diving in to the risers, fallers, and also players steadying their stocks in the 2025 NHL draft class with some big names and some names that you may not have heard of just yet. We've got a bit of breadth among the players that we're talking about here today. I hope that you're enjoying your morning, evening, afternoon, anything in between, and that maybe you can grab a nice warm beverage here in the wintertime, or maybe you're in a balmier location than I am and can enjoy something colder to drink. But let's just dive straight into the show here because we have a lot of players to cover. We're going to look through 8 risers of the class, including Michael Misa and Jake O'Brien. Then we're going to look at 5 players who've really solidified their draft stock, are steadying off, are perhaps not rocketing up most draft boards, but are very much finding solidity and finding consistency in their seasons. And finally, in the third segment, we're going to look at 4 players whose stocks are falling a little bit for different reasons and to different extents, but 4 storylines that we can look at a little bit and dig our teeth into. And all 4 fallers that we're looking at are USA-based prospects in the USHL and NCAA. So let's just start off with the first segment because we have 8 players to dive into here with the risers of the draft class. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below which players are rising on your boards. But for me personally, and also looking at the consensus, this is a mix of those two things in terms of players whose stocks are going up steadily over the past weeks, the past months. And we're going to start off with not the biggest name we're talking about in this segment, but the player that is, I think, really, really rising on a lot of people's boards, and that is Jake O'Brien of the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL. This is a 6'2", 170-pound right shot playmaking centerman. He's a June 16th, 07th birthday, so on the younger side of this year's draft class, and he's been ranked anywhere between about 9th and 25th at the moment on draft boards, but he is climbing. And that 9th overall slot is on Bob McKenzie's board, which carries weight of NHL teams' perceptions. And beyond that, this is a player who this season has been absolutely heating up as the year's gone on. 11 points in his last 5 games, 21 points in his last 10, and he's up to 82 points, including 29 goals in 56 OHL games this season. With Brantford, he has been truly like a revelation for that team, playing a massive role. He sits 3rd on team scoring, but the gap between 3rd and 4th is over 20 points, is 23 points ahead of Cole Brown in 3rd on team scoring, who has 59 points in 55 games. It's very much been the trio of Nick Lardis, Patrick Thomas, and Jake O'Brien that have been doing the heavy lifting offensively there. And O'Brien is a creative, deft playmaking centerman. Really, really great vision. The execution on his passes has just become fantastic as the year has gone on. And he's found himself in the top 10 boards of also many public scouts, individual scouts. Briser la Glace comes to mind, a really good follow on Twitter, also has a podcast, and will be joining the show next week for a Jackson Smith prospect spotlight. So that's something to look forward to on your end. He has Jake O'Brien inside his top 7, I believe, already at this stage. So this is a player who's definitely convincing a lot of scouts at the moment with just some fantastic performances, and he has a good work ethic. The defensive value has gotten a lot better, and he has a long development runway still. He's still a bit raw in certain areas, physically especially is something to note, but he has that top 10 pick upside in the draft. He could really be a top 6 playmaker, and the floor might really be in a high-end third line or low-end second line capacity, with the upside to be much more than just that, and the playmaking really carrying that kind of upside. Very, very interesting player. But let's move on to Michael Misa, sticking in the OHL and looking at the top end of the draft class, because Misa's been a perpetual top 5 player this season. Ever since the year started in the OHL, he's been in those conversations. He leads the entire CHL in scoring as the Saginaw Spirit captain in his draft year season. He has 53 goals in 52 games, 110 points. It has been incredible to watch this season offensively. The goal scoring instincts, the finishing ability, also from range are big areas of strength, but I don't think that this is a player that can be boiled down to just being called a sniper, because he is a two-way force. He's highly intelligent, a great playmaker, great give and go kind of player, has a high-end motor, excellent skater, great defensive instincts. He's a very polished and refined player in his off-puck habits at both ends of the ice. He gets open, he supports teammates. This is a player I think deserves consideration at first overall. I think a lot of teams will favor Matthew Schaefer for the profile and the runway, perhaps. Michael Misa is closer to the finished product than Matthew Schaefer is, but still, this is a player that I fully believe in. He's my second overall player. He has been for a couple months now as well, and he's a player that can just break games open, but also brings that reliability that so many NHL teams seek, and is also going to really ease his transition to professional and NHL hockey to find his footing in perhaps a middle six capacity before rising up the lineup to be a minute munching top line player who can drive offense, score important goals, but also shut down opposing top lines. There's a lot of upside with this player, and definitely has some similarities, I think, to Macklin Celebrini last season in that two-way refinement, in those habits that I think are going to translate really smoothly to the NHL level. But next we have Radim Mrtka, 6'6" right shot defenseman from the Seattle Thunderbirds in the WHL, who we covered in a prospect spotlight that I'm going to link above in the cards just last week. Really intelligent, refined two-way defenseman, also young for the draft class, June 9th, 07th birthday, and he's a player that I think has a lot of runway in terms of the defensive side of the game. The instincts, the physicality, the range, even the underlying mobility supports his style of play. He's a player that can control his gap management incredibly well, and is playing like upwards of 27 and even 30 minutes a night at the moment in Seattle, and has elevated that team from being a really difficult watch to one that has won 7 of his last 10 games. This is a guy that's elevated the team, has also explored his offense a little bit. That's still more of a work in progress in terms of NHL projection. This is a guy that's going to shut things down defensively and can support in the breakup and in the breakout, but the offensive upside is still rather theoretical at the moment, and will still have to be explored further in order to project as even a second power play kind of contributor. But he can link play well between teammates. He's a good passer, but the creativity and the playmaking habits aren't quite there yet. But he still has a point a game at the moment in the WHL, because he's just playing massive minutes and is highly involved in play, and is getting a lot of secondary assists as a result of that. Mrtka's a player that I could very much see being drafted inside the top 10. There's a bit of a shortage at right shot defense in this year's draft class at the upper end, and with this player you have that package of physicality, defensive intelligence, and massive frame and physical runway too to still grow into it. He hasn't even crossed a 200-pound threshold yet at 6'6". So this is a player that still has a lot of physical and overall growth to see in his game, and that could see him being picked very high up on draft day. Now, sticking in the WHL, we're going to look at a winger, and that is Benjamin Kindel, a player that has absolutely lit things up for the Calgary Hitmen this season. He's a 5'10", 176-pound right shot right winger, April 19th, 07 birthday, and he has 30 goals and 85 points in 52 games this season, which is second in scoring on Calgary, just 4 points behind line mate Oliver Tulk, and 34 points ahead of third place, Connor Fitston. So this is very much the two players doing the offensive driving in Calgary, and Kindel's been a revelation in his playmaking, in his connective passing, the creativity that he's shown in the offensive zone. The skill has just been showing more and more and more every single week. This is a guy that could definitely be rising into the top 20, top 15 conversations with just how dynamic he's been. He's still quite raw physically, especially has some runway in that sense, but the chemistry he's found with Oliver Tulk has just been a joy to watch this season, and the playmaking again is the driving factor with Ben Kindel, not unlike it is with Jake O'Brien. But moving on, we have 4 players I wanted to give shout outs to from my own region in the USHL. So players that aren't necessarily consensus first rounders at this stage, but still guys that I think deserve a mention because they have been really impressing me in my most recent viewings. Starting off with Ashton Schultz of the Chicago Steel in the USHL, a 6 foot, 181-pound right shot forward, very, very detailed two-way center. He's been the linchpin for Chicago in terms of two-way play this season. Very, very mature defensively. Like the detail has surprised me every single game, considering that he only logged 11 USHL games prior to this season, and in a very depth role with the Sioux Falls Stampede, where he just got a single assist. This was a guy playing in Minnetonka High last season alongside a guy like Javon Moore, an Ottawa Senators draft pick, and he is a really intelligent kind of player. I think there's a runway as well in terms of his playmaking game. Offensively, I think he has bottom 6 NHL upside and could be a really good value selection in the late second, third round range of the NHL draft. A player with runway, a player who's still blossoming at the USHL level and discovering his offensive capabilities, but his week-to-week progression has impressed me. 28 points in 39 games doesn't jump off the page, but Chicago has not been an offensive powerhouse this season, and Schultz has been key for them in both directions on the ice. Then with the NTDP, there's a couple players I wanted to highlight here, starting off with Charlie Trethewey, really rising up my personal board, showing a lot more of the upside that was touted going into this season that he showed prior to making the jump to junior hockey. And at 6'2", 196 pounds, as a highly mobile right shot defenseman, and an August 2nd, 07 birthday, just a month and a half off the cutoff for 2026 draft class. There's a lot to like with him in terms of runway, in terms of mobility, physical frame, and he's really grown into his defensive role this season since Carter Amico has gone down to injury, who's missing now the entire year, unfortunately. And Trethewey has benefited in terms of game time, in terms of responsibility, and in terms of role. This is a guy that earlier on this season, he panicked under pressure a lot, especially on retrievals, would just throw the puck as far away from him as possible whenever pressure came near. That is changing. It's still an area that needs work, but his defensive game, his physical implications, his rush defending, his ability to force play to the outside, keep it away from the danger areas down the slot, down the middle lane in transition. That's been really good to watch and progress this season. And he's become a steadying presence rather than a player that just plays hot potato with the puck all night and is seeing limited ice time usage as a result of that. There are many games this season where he played less than 10 minutes and is now a consistent 20-minute a night top 4 piece for the NTDP and is playing an important role in their recent surging performances with more solid defensive displays than we saw earlier on in the season. Very important player. Then LJ Mooney, last but not least, wanted to mention this player because since coming back from injury in December after the disgusting knee-on-knee collision that he suffered in the NCAA or against NCAA competition earlier in the season, the 5'7", 157-pound right shot, right wing spark plug has been incessantly hardworking, has the highest motor in the draft, in my opinion, Has some competition there, certainly with guys like Carter Bear, but he's right up there, and he's been exploring his playmaking game a lot more in recent weeks, and that makes me excited about the overall upside. Not a player that's going to see first-round contention in all likelihood because of his frame, but a player that in the third round maybe I think could be a massively high-value swing. Not a sure thing by any stretch of the imagination, but the combination of intelligence, awareness, incessant work rate and motor, good physical tools and habits. He gets underneath sticks, underneath opponents. He's a real pest on the forecheck. He's difficult to play against even at his size. Plus, now the dynamic playmaking that's growing in his game. There's a lot to like with this player's progression, and I think that he's a player that's going to be inside my personal top 64, top 50 even when we get closer to the draft, because there is a lot of uncertainty with his projection, but the underlying foundation of his game is something that I don't think is going to change and is only going to grow with time as he matures physically as well. That's something that I am personally willing to bet on and swing on early on day 2 of the NHL draft. But that wraps up this lengthy first segment. In the next one, we're going to look at some players who have steadied their stocks over the course of the past month or so. And finally, in the last one, we're going to look at a couple fallers in the draft. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment with 5 players who have steadied off their draft stocks and are really finding some consistency in their play. Starting off with Anton Frondell, and this is a player that definitely could have also fit in the first segment as a riser because he's rising on my personal board. But in terms of consensus, this is a player that has been inside the top 10 all season long, and I'm only warming up and seeing that in the past month and a half, ever since he's started to see consistent minutes in Hockey Allsvenskan. The pro game is just more suited to his style than the junior game is, and we've been seeing that, and he's found a real level of comfort with Jurgen, really combining with other young studs on that team like Victor Eklund, who's another player in this segment, because these two players with Jurgen have just played such consistent hockey in top 6 minutes over the course of the past almost year for Eklund and the past months for Anton Frondell. And I believe that these are also two players that have shown a real growth in their defensive habits, in their physical habits, their ability to stay inside opponents, to box opponents out defensively, and to access the middle in the offensive zone. Real growth is I've seen from these players in the past months. Frondell especially I wanted to highlight here because Eklund's a player I'm going to link above in the cards. Just did a massive rundown on his game last week. So if you want to hear what I have to think about his style of play, how he plays, it's all up there in the corner if you're watching on YouTube. And if not, it will be linked in the description if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform. But Anton Frondell, 6 goals, 16 points in his last 10 games, split between Hockey Allsvenskan and the Five Nations U18 tournament, playing against the NTDP, Switzerland, Finland, and Czechia. But in his last game in Hockey Allsvenskan against Altuma IS in a 4-2 win, Anton Frondell had 2 goals and 2 assists in 13 and a half minutes. In 13 and a half minutes, he was directly involved on every single goal that they scored in that game. Game before, he had an assist. Game before that, a goal and 2 assists in 14 minutes. He's playing in that third line capacity. He's getting some power play opportunities. He's using his shot as a massive threat, both at even strength and on the man advantage. And his physical habits, his defensive solidity have gained him the trust of his coaches to get that consistent ice time. And he has now 20 points and 9 goals in 25 games this season in Hockey Allsvenskan against professional competition. This is the player that we wanted to see this season, and I'm so hoping he's able to stay healthy, because if he's able to continue this trend over the course of the rest of the campaign, definitely has arguments inside the top 7 debate, in my opinion. Really, really intelligent, physical, defensively solid player. I don't see the same upside I do with other guys like Roger McQueen, for instance, in that range, and he might fall closer to 7th on my board as a result of that as we get closer to the draft, if he's able to keep up this form. But still a guy that is, I think, very clearly steadying his stock as a top 10 caliber player. Moving on, in terms of steadying players, beyond just the two young Jurgen players, we have Radim Benák in the USHL, a guy who's pretty steadily just been top 20, top 15 in league scoring this season, right about a point a game as a playmaking center. But he's been moved along to the wing a lot more in recent weeks and recent months. And it's been a bit of a hybrid role. He plays the center responsibilities in the defensive zone much of the time, but in the offensive zone, he's kept on the right wing to keep in his pocket of space that he likes to create from right above the right circle along the half wall. He's so dangerous as a playmaker from those pockets, and he's finding ways to get the puck to the middle of the ice with more consistency at the moment. And I think those habits, when you combine that with a ridiculously high motor in his 5'7" frame, and with high end intelligence and defensive habits that I think are something that you can really work with, this is a player I think has some runway even as an NHL player. Moving to the wing, I think, is really positive for him, but he has those defensive habits that could make him a shutdown defensive winger also at the NHL level, while bringing that dynamic playmaking in the other direction. And being able to offer both of those things is going to be key for him to overcome the odds as an undersized player. Next, we have Carter Bear of the Everett Silvertips in the WHL, still among top 10 in league scoring, still a very productive playmaking, high motor winger, been playing a bit at center this season as well, but more than anything, a player that just brings incessant pace, incessant aggression. He outworks every single player on the ice, night in, night out. And I think that is solidifying him as a top 12 player in this draft class. I don't think he's climbing into top 5 conversations. I think there are some limitations in terms of the offensive upside, but still a guy that could bring long-term value inside your top 6 in a playmaking kind of high motor role, and who can also adapt to different line mates, adapt to the situation, adapt to the moment, and also in the playoffs to ramp up to 11 in terms of physicality and intensity, and in the regular season also be able to bring more of that deft playmaking element. There's a lot to like with this prospect. But last but not least, another player whose prospect spotlight, whose scouting report half-hour deep dive, which was still with Hattie on the channel before he had to leave. I'll link that in the cards up above, because Caleb Desnoyers is the last player for this segment. A two-way centerman with violence and high motor, not the prettiest skater in the world, but a creative playmaker who gets the dangerous areas, has leadership capabilities, is loved in every locker room he enters, and I think is definitely a top 10 potential pick in this year's draft class, because he brings what NHL teams want in their middle 6 centers come playoff time. And I don't think he's going to be a top liner, but he brings that middle 6 type of solidity, but also offensive ability to support and elevate dynamic wingers while insulating them defensively. A lot to like with this player. But that wraps up this second segment. In the final one, we're going to look at 4 fallers in the draft: Ivan Ryabkin, Sascha Boumedienne, James Hagens, and Conrad Fondrk. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, or the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million, no medical exam required. And it's more affordable than you'd think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance policy for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. All right, let's wrap up this final segment for the show today as we look at a couple fallers in the draft class. And we're going to start off with the big name here, James Hagens. He's also in this for a very different reason to the other players in the fallers category, as he has been overtaken rather than fallen due to poor performances himself. He's still playing some excellent hockey, both internationally with the USA and in the NCAA with Boston College since returning from the World Junior Championships. He's perpetually playing first line minutes, playing 17, 18 minutes a night with Boston College, and he has 10 points in his last 10 games. 5'10", 176-pound left shot center who brings elite level handling and creativity and dynamism off the rush. He's an incredibly speedy and pacey player who can create at those highest speeds of his, and has combined with for beautiful sequences this season with Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard on that top line. He has 8 goals and 31 points in 29 games this season. He's been snake bitten in terms of the goal scoring. He's been creating a lot more in terms of goal scoring chances than what that would show. And he has 9 points in 7 games at the World Juniors for Team USA, including 5 goals in those 7 games as an 18-year-old playing in a U20 tournament. A very dynamic player, but a player who hasn't quite ramped up the gear like perhaps we thought he would earlier on this season. This isn't a player that's contending with Macklin Celebrini level NCAA performances, or even Adam Fantilli for that matter, and arguably playing with more surrounding skill as well. So a guy that on my personal board has fallen beneath Matthew Schaefer and Michael Misa. Those two OHL players are really my top 2 at this moment, with James Hagens solidifying his spot in third. I'm not seeing him drop lower than third on my board anytime soon for any of like Porter Martone or Roger McQueen or Victor Eklund or Anton Frondell. I see James Hagens as being a very clear top 3 talent in the draft class, but he no longer holds a stranglehold on first overall like he did earlier this season, which is why he is a bit of a faller for today's exercise. Then let's move on to another player who is falling a bit more for performance-related reasons, and that would be Ivan Ryabkin of the Muskegon Lumberjacks in the USHL, a player who on consensus rankings is still ranked at about 12th overall, or 11th overall, sorry. This is the Elite Prospects Consolidated Ranking tool. And he has 15 points and 8 goals in 12 games so far since making his move to North American hockey in the USHL. Recently, he scored 2 goals and 3 points against a weaker Tri-City Storm team, as well as 2 assists against the NTDP. A guy who's been delivering some really good performances at the USHL level in terms of pure production, but whose effort level and motor and floating tendencies later in periods, later in games when he gets a bit more tired, no longer really supporting defensively and delegating the center responsibilities in his own zone to even a 16-year-old winger, or who can play center as well, and Tynan Lawrence. Much of the time in my viewings, there's still a lot of question marks In the cards above, you're going to see as well the scouting report that where I just fully dive into his game. You can look at his habits there as well. I brought out a tactics board to break down how he plays the game, what kind of patterns you see with this player, and where the areas of question still are, but still a guy with good physicality that can use it, usually in terms of frustration and chasing hits, rather than using it more pragmatically to create space down low in the offensive zone, but still has some upside, is an intelligent off-puck mover, is a good playmaking center, but still a lot of question marks with this guy, which is why he is a faller here for us in this episode. And the final two players I wanted to highlight, one from the NCAA and one from the USHL. In the NCAA, I have Boston University's Sascha Boumedienne, who has been falling this season. The Swedish left shot defenseman has a goal and 8 points in 29 games this season in the NCAA, playing upwards of 20 minutes much of the time, but being much more of a solid two-way player. He's an awful skater, but a really intelligent defender, positionally very sound. And on top of that, a player with really great passing ability in terms of the breakout, in terms of getting an accurate stretch pass to get out of the zone with control, with speed, but also making the intelligent, simple pass when he's under pressure. This is a pretty composed and intelligent player that has some runway in terms of being a really good thinker of the game and having some good defensive and physical tools at 6'2" and 183 pounds. But the skating is a question mark, and the offense hasn't been coming this season. So he's dropping more into that maybe 30 to 45 range rather than being a potential top 20 pick like he looked earlier on, heading into the season primarily. Last but not least, from the US NTDP, I wanted to highlight Conrad Fondrk, a player who can flash some dynamism at times, but has struggled to really stay involved as a speedy puck carrying center with the NTDP. He's young for the draft class, as a June 1st, 07 birthday, but he has 21 points in 36 games this season. The offensive production has been a little bit lacking, and I think more than anything, he's been forced to the outside. He's struggling to get inside, and that's been a big area of question for me in my viewings of the NTDP this season, but still a player I think has some potential as a top 3 round candidate rather than a top 50 or top 64 guy like he's been talked about in different circles at periods during the draft cycle this year. But he's a hard worker still, but he needs to keep his activity rate up and his physical play engaged in order to really project as an NHL piece, in my opinion. There's still work to be done, but he's going off to Boston University next season, which is, of course, a great place to develop as a player, especially in terms of working on motor and engagement and inside drive. That should be a good place for him to refine his craft. But that wraps up the episode for us here today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, please do like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below what you thought about today's show. Which risers and fallers did I miss? Who would you want to highlight for these areas? And which players have stood out the most to you in terms of being massive risers? These could also be players that went from being complete no names in the draft to being just on your board in your top 100 kind of rankings, if you have your own amateur rankings that you like to work on. I'd love to hear from you down below in the comments. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the pod. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steal will make sure that you can build not only the most competitive, but the most sustainable fantasy hockey roster. But that wraps things up here for me today. I'm Sebastian High, the USHL scout at Elite Prospects. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you're able to tune back in very shortly.